Hello again and welcome back. In this one we're going to be GUI-fying our hosts appender. This one's going to be kind of interesting because it's going to bring us into not only a larger package, but it will also kind of introduce some more stringent app design that you'd see in a lot of programs and applications, in that we're going to kind of package our application as a class. We're going to have some initializers. We're going to have some specific actions that our application will do. All of it's very simple, very, very, very simple, but it's kind of the beginning of some more complicated structuring. I'm going to go ahead and kind of be more verbose with this and try and explain things as we go. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to import our library that we'll be using for our GUI. And for this one, I'm going to be using tkinter. And that is because it is built in and it is pretty much the easiest, I guess, simplest. I wouldn't say the easiest, but it's definitely a very simple GUI wrapper. So let's go ahead and just get started. All right, so boom, let's add it. All right, we're going to import TK. We're going to import label, button, entry. We'll need a string var and disabled and normal, and probably W and E and W. All right. Let's go ahead and make that capital L. All right. So what we're doing here is we're pulling in a bunch of these things so that we can just kind of quickly say, oh, I want to make a label. I want to do this. I want to do that. And we don't have to keep kind of futzing with whatever we're trying to do. All right. So first thing we're going to do, class. I'm going to call this hosts appender. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define an initializer. In Python, and in fact, in pretty much any object-oriented language, when you instantiate an object, there will be some kind of a function or a method or a subroutine or something that runs the moment that a object is created. In this case, what we're going to do is override the initializer and set a bunch of values. In fact, this is where the lion's share of the actual code's going to be, because when this class is instantiated, what we're going to do is we're going to set up all the visuals. So everything that creates the graphical user interface. So first thing, it is this. All right. Underscore init underscore. As I showed earlier in a previous video, some of these underscore variables that you'll see littered throughout Python are built into the language or built into its constructors or into some of these other systems. And these systems, which have these underscores, they're handled by Python, but we can hijack them in some cases. So just like docstring and some of those other ones that we were doing, this one is the default initializer. In a lot of languages, it's new or it's init without the underscores, but in the case of Python, pretty much everything that's constructed by the language has the double underscores at the opening and closing. In this case, we have to pass ourself because we need to be self-referential, because Python is like that. And we're also passing in master. Now, master is kind of an interesting thing because master is the actual GUI manager. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a self-reference called self.master equals master. So we're defining a property on this object that is the master object that we're going to pass in when we instantiate the object, which I will show you in a bit. So once we do that, let's go ahead and self.ip equals none. Make sure to do a capital N. That is basically nil, or null or whatever in most other languages. So we'll do self.label underscore notice text equals string var. You'll notice that we pull in string var up here. Now, string var is an interesting beast that I could go into in detail, but basically what string var is it is an object that is derived from the GUI library itself, and it's used for updating something on the fly. So you don't want to say, oh, let's write this string on a label, and then if you update the label, you'll have to redraw the label and do all this kind of crazy stuff. What the string var does is it lets you basically render a label with the string var, and then the string var, if you update that, all the labels globally will be updated as well. So it's actually a really, really cool feature of this library. So let's go ahead and say, now we're going to say label notice text dot set. See, this is where we're setting the actual value. So we assign the value to, so we're assigning a string var to this. So our label notice text property on this object. And then we're setting the value. So this is just another method, another function that's being called on the object. So we're assigning it on line 10, and then we're setting that already assigned object on 11. And then we're just going to put in here, we're going to say awaiting hosts append action. All right, then we're going to say self label underscore notice. Now I'm not going to say text because the text is going to be specifically the string var for that label. And then this is going to be the actual label. And so then we're going to say a label, and this is the label that we're importing from the library. So this is where we're saying, okay, we're going to define label underscore notice as a label itself. And then we're going to pass in master, right? So that way the label knows who it belongs to. And then this is where you give it a whole bunch of extra stuff. In this case, all we're going to do is we're going to do text variable, and that is going to equal self.label notice text. All right, so this object that we created, or this object we assigned and then set its value here, we then are saying that, hey, the text variable that we're going to watch is this specific one here. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to copy this, and we're going to do this 3 times because we're going to have 3 labels that we're going to want to control. And the first one after is going to be our IP text. So we're going to say label IP text. All right, and then and we're just going to replace this. So it's going to be very similar in structure here. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to say, please enter an IP. And then we're going to come over here, and instead of notice, we're going to replace this with HN for host name. So again, all this right now, we are still working on just building the interface. So it goes to show you, just the level of some of these things. And this is, like I said, a very simple library to use. All right, entry IP equals entry, and we're just going to pass in master because we just want some text entry fields, and we don't really care if they have any special properties because we're going to handle that in the logic of our actual, when we actually start processing stuff. Remember, this is just a setup stage. So we're just going to create these 2, and then we're going to say self.accept button equals button. So here again, entry is imported here, label here, and then this button is being imported here. And so our button is going to be master, and we're going to say text equals, and we're passing a string. And these are, kind of interesting, built-in arguments that we're overriding here. And then the command, this is the function that it itself will call. So we're going to call this one a CCEPT input, if I can learn how to spell. So we're going to accept the input here. And the next thing we're going to do is after we accept the input, we're going to put a quit here. And this one will be quit. And then instead of accept button, this will be the quit button. Okay, so we've just defined two buttons, two text fields, inputs, and 3 labels here. All right, and then now what we're going to do is we're going to say self.label notice.grid. Now grid is a property of each of these that will define the physical shape, size, and position of the objects that we're going to be building. So in this case, it's pretty simple. The parameters we're going to be using are very simple parameters, but you can get significantly more complex. So in this case, it's going to be row, and then we're going to say column, and then column span, forgotten in there, and then that will be 4, and then sticky. Sticky is going to define kind of like bounding boxes per se, like how it's going to react to other elements and the window itself. In this case, all of our objects are going to be W plus E, and I'm not going to get into exactly what that means, but you can play with that or look up what those parameters specifically are, since that's a bit out of what we need to do right now. So I'm going to say 1, 2, and then this one's going to be 0, 0, 0, and then 2, and then these should be 2. All right, so I'm just thinking a little bit about this. All right, so this one should be label IP, and then this one should be label HN, and then this one should be entry IP. You see how this is working? I knew you could. All right, and then there's our entry for our host name. And then the other objects we have left are, they're buttons. Accept button. And lastly, but definitely not least, a very important object, our quit button. All right, and this should be probably column 0. That should be column 2. These should be 2, 2. And this should be 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 0, 0, 0, 0, 4, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. I think that's right. Our buttons do not need to be sticky, and we will not make them sticky. All right, so what are we doing? Well, what's actually going on here? Well, we've already defined these objects up here, and we've already assigned, we've defined and assigned them. So like entry IP is an entry, we're passing the master, and now we're saying we're going to take that entry IP and we're going to place it in row 1, column 2, and it's going to go 2 columns wide. And it will be, have our stickiness, which again, you can look those specifics up. All right, so that's it. That's all we need to do for our setup code. This code itself will make the visual appearance of our application exactly as we want it. So let's go ahead and start defining some actual actions. So we're going to define quit, and we're going to say root.quit. This is also root is kind of an interesting thing. It is inherited from the actual library that we're using. And that will basically tell the graphical user interface, the window that we've created, to die. And then what's going to happen is once the window dies, there's nothing else to do, and then the program will end. So then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and define our accept input, because this is where the main logic is actually going to be. Oh yeah, I forgot we need to be self-referential here, guys. And let's go ahead and add self to our quit, self to our accept. All right, so now what we're going to do is self.ip equals self.entryIP.get. All right, so what we're doing is we're the value that the user has inputted into this field. And we're going to duplicate that. And then we're going to change this, guess what, to HN for host name. So our host name. And so what we're doing is we're just gathering the two values. And these values can still be null or none or whatever. They can still be bad values. We're just gathering them at this point. So we're going to say if self.ip and self.hostname, then we're going to say hosts equals, you might recognize this from our other program. And then we're going to see Windows system 32 drivers, etc. hosts. All right, and we're going to append. Okay, now we're going to hosts.write. We're going to say +/n. Add some spacing there. This is going to be our host name. And then the front half will be our IP. All right, and this is going to be just a space. Exactly the same as we did in our other file. In fact, if we switch on over, you'll see here that it's pretty much the exact same. Obviously, we'll let me uncomment that so you can see a little better. This little chunk here is what we're basically rewriting. And then let's just go ahead and copy that while we're at it. And then come over here. We'll close the file. And then let's go ahead and update. So self.label our noticed text. See, notice that we're not actually calling the label itself, right? This is our label itself on line 12. So label notice, but we're targeting our text. So this string var that we created. Remember what I said? We could update it. All we're going to do is call set again, and we're going to say host file has been updated. Yeah, and then we're going to say accept button dot configure, right? And we're going to say state equals disabled. Now disabled is a flag that we're importing from up here, so it's not like a string disabled. It is specifically a constant. All right, and then we're gonna else this. So if something else doesn't work, what we're gonna do is let's just copy this because, you know, easy. We're gonna come over here and we're gonna say something went wrong. So this is what happens if IP and hostname are not set. So if you don't fill in the values, or if you're for some reason you input some kind of incorrect value. All right, and that's about it for the major body of the code. Now we need to write a couple more lines to instantiate our object and to ensure that we're passing in what will become our master object. So first we need to do is assign root to TK. So that's our library. Then we're going to say GUI equals hosts appender. That's the class that we've created above, and we're going to call that root, or we're going to pass in root. All right, and now we're going to say root.main loop, and that's it. So let's review this real quick, because there's quite a bit here. We're going to import what we need and anything related to this package. We're going to create a class. We're going to instantiate it. When it's being instantiated, we're going to take the passed in master object, which will be the controller for this package. And you don't really need to know about what's going on in the back end of this package right now. It's something you could look into, you could learn, but it's probably not terribly important for what's being done here. So the specifics are, once we instantiate the object, we're going to define a master just in case we want to have reference to it. Then we're going to set our IP and host name to none. We're going to create 3 labels, we're assigning string vars to each of these here. And then we are going ahead and assigning or setting the actual text of this string var. Then we're saying, hey, we're going to use this string var as a text variable when we create the actual label object. And we're doing that 3 times. This one, we should actually come over here and change this to please enter a host name. There we go. And now we create 2 entry fields, one for the IP and one for the host name. And then we create 2 buttons, one for an OK and one for quit. And then we lay out our structure. We organize our elements into a grid-based display pattern. Then we create a quit function, which will allow us to quit. And then we create the accept input, which is kind of what we run when you press OK. And we check and make sure that there's values, that IP and hostname are set, and that we can turn those IP and hostname into an actual action where we write it in our host file and then update a display. And of course, if our IP or our hostname are either blank or not valid, we will return something wrong. And then we instantiate the package we're using, pass it into our object as we create our object, and then we run our GUI. So this, as with our previous host appender, will not function if we run it outright. We will need to run it from elevated privileges. If you're running on a Mac or Linux, you'll have to sudo the script. So sudo python, hosts appender GUI.py. On Windows, you'll need to run it from a terminal or command line with administrator privileges. I just so happen to have a administrator privileged window right here, and I will go ahead and run it. And you'll see here that we're going to get an error about the TK. This is because in this module is actually named slightly different in version 2 of Python and version 3. So if the capital doesn't work, just rename it to lowercase and vice versa. Now, if we go back, it should function just fine now. All right, so we have an error here. Let's see where this is. HN has no attribute HN. Label HN text. And then let's go ahead and run that again. There we go. There's our GUI. All right, so now that we have our GUI, let's go ahead and test quit first. Click quit, and it will actually close. And since this shell is open separately, it's not going to close our shell window. So let's go ahead and run it again. We'll have here, we will have our IP. So let's go ahead and and we'll call this one, we'll say our host will be www.happytesttime.com. We're going to click OK. Beep. And we're going to, Windows might help. So now let's just go ahead and quit. You'll see it even though we called an error on that branch of the application, the main GUI is actually still running. So I was able to quit by clicking the quit button, even though pressing OK actually caused a exception. So let's go ahead and run that again. And then let's leave this blank and test. You'll see it says something went wrong. That's because our host name was missing. Exactly what we want. Super test time. Bam. All right, third time's a charm. Think it's going to work? Yeah, it will. Boom. Says host file has been updated. And also, our OK button is disabled. That's to prevent us from entering multiple times. Now, properly, what should be done is there should be some kind of an alert saying, hey, it's been modified successfully. maybe take focus away from the OK button back to the IP address, clear the IP address in the hostname field, and then that would be an application that you could enter in both values, click OK, it'll add it, and then you could do it over and over and over and continually add to your host file. But let's make sure that this actually worked. So instead of going through and opening up my host file, I'm actually going to go back to my old script from the previous video, and we're just going to take this read part and we're going to run it. So we're just going to read it. And you'll see here that I have happy test, this is test, and then the one we just did, super test time. And there you go. You've now created an application that has a graphical user interface, albeit a simple one. I'm not going to say it's complex or beautiful or anything along those lines, but using these very basic premises, you can take this knowledge and use it in so many different things. So I'd like to see what you do. So if you ever have a chance to build something like this or to use anything you learned in this video, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to have you post a comment or a link to a GitHub repo or something. Anyways, I hope you learned something. Have a good one, and I'll see you on the next one.